The argument over who controls a child's education and the term school choice did not start in the 1990s. It goes back to the founding of the public system itself. In the 1830s, reformers like Horace Mann envisioned a shared, tax-supported public school system to forge a common civic culture. But in practice, these early classrooms used the King James Bible and embedded Protestant moral instruction. Millions of arriving Catholic immigrants realized this public system didn't serve their children on fair terms. Their response was an early act of educational exit, building their own parallel network of parochial schools. State governments retaliated in the 1870s by passing constitutional amendments specifically designed to block public funding from reaching those Catholic institutions. Following the Supreme Court's decision in Brown v. Board of Education, several Southern states established private segregation academies. They funneled public money into tuition grants so white families could flee newly integrated public schools, leaving Black children in starved, hollowed-out districts. When critics express skepticism about public dollars following families out of a shared public system, that distrust is grounded in actual history. For over a century, choice frequently meant either religious self-preservation or subsidized racial exclusion. By the 1980s, a genuine crisis of public confidence in American schooling took hold. Enter Albert Shanker. He was a union president who had walked picket lines and been arrested for striking. He recognized the system was rigid and failing, and he wanted teachers to lead the reform from within. In 1988, Shanker proposed the charter school. He envisioned small, integrated public schools where groups of unionized teachers were freed from bureaucratic mandates. They would operate as laboratories of practice, inventing new pedagogies and sharing their breakthroughs with the wider public system. 3 decades earlier, economist Milton Friedman had outlined a very different theory. He argued that while the government should fund education, it had no business operating the schools. Friedman wanted to issue vouchers, letting families take their tax dollars to any private, religious, or for-profit market alternative. American voters repeatedly rejected Friedman's outright vouchers at the ballot box. Realizing direct privatization was politically toxic, market-oriented conservatives co-opted Shanker's language of charters and innovation to advance their own goals. The strategy was highly effective. Charter schools offered an alternative pathway to establish a crucial precedent, proving that public education dollars could legally and politically follow students out of the traditional public system. A labor leader's modest idea to protect and renew public education from within became the primary legislative vehicle for dismantling it. Over the 1990s and 2000s, massive philanthropic foundations built the architecture of this new market. Families like the Waltons and the Broads poured hundreds of millions into lobbying, litigation, and leadership academies, pushing to manage city school districts like corporate portfolios. The federal government accelerated this expansion. Bipartisan policies like No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top forced states to lift their legislative caps on charter school growth if they wanted to compete for billions in federal grant money. This chart shows the reality on the ground, the staggering volume of urban charter lottery applications compared to the tiny number of available seats. Millions of Black and Latino parents, exhausted by chronically failing neighborhood districts, were desperate to secure better options for their kids.
That demand was entirely voluntary and incredibly intense, but the enrollment process created a harsh sociological sorting effect. Through complex application requirements and informal counseling out practices, the charter sector systematically scooped up students from slightly more stable families. The children experiencing extreme poverty, homelessness, or requiring intensive special education were filtered out. Because per-pupil funding followed the migrating students, traditional public districts watched their budgets evaporate, while they retained the highest need, most expensive populations to educate. The charter boom provided a genuine, necessary exit strategy for some marginalized families. At the same time, it inflicted a devastating financial and systemic cost on the communities left in its wake. After 30 years, we don't have to rely on ideology to judge the results. Comprehensive data, specifically the Stanford Credo studies, gives us a clear look at academic outcomes across the country. In Michigan, wealthy advocates like Betsy DeVos championed an intentionally unregulated, hyper-permissive charter environment. They removed statewide caps and allowed universities and community colleges to compete to authorize as many schools as possible. This created a market failure in Detroit. For-profit management organizations set up undersized, failing schools and acted essentially as real estate trusts. They owned the buildings and leased them back to the schools at inflated rates, siphoning public revenue straight into private hands. Compare that to Boston or post-Katrina New Orleans, where the entire district was rebuilt as a charter network. These cities operated strictly regulated, largely nonprofit charter models, and they achieved massive academic gains. Those gains happened precisely because the state maintained unified accountability and ruthlessly closed operators that failed to educate children. Yet even these successful models carry a steep hidden cost. To sustain those test scores, many high-performing networks rely on punishing workloads, demanding 60-hour weeks that result in massive, continuous staff turnover. The data settles the argument. Unregulated free markets in education produce exploitation and fraud. Highly regulated, nonprofit flexibility produces academic results. Treating public education like a traditional consumer market has failed. Schools carry a democratic purpose, requiring active democratic checks, not just blind consumer trust. Now the educational frontier is shifting again. States are rapidly passing universal education savings accounts, extending public funds to private microschools and homeschooling pots. These programs are the ultimate realization of Milton Friedman's voucher dream. They are completely untethered from the mutual accountability and regulatory guardrails that Albert Shanker originally envisioned. Without transparent financial oversight or strict academic standards, these new accounts risk replicating Michigan's extractive failures on a national scale. Only this time, the money will be nearly impossible to trace. To actually serve America's most vulnerable children, we have to stop building systems designed to reward financial and ideological interests. It requires returning to Shanker's core demand: institutions that prioritize public obligations and answer directly to the communities they serve. This video is based on Volume 2, Fentanyl Nation: Inside America's Opioid Catastrophe by Sue B. Howell, available on Amazon. Please subscribe for more videos.